Let's get started. In this presentation, we're going to be talking all about threat hunting. A quick agenda for what we'll be going over in this series of videos. In the first video, we'll be covering the definition of threat hunting, the skills needed for threat hunting, and what all of those entail and what skills you may need in your threat arsenal as a threat hunter. The next video will cover building your threat hunting team, as well as planning a threat hunting operation and automating threat hunting with SentinelOne. The last video in this series will cover the class participation exercise, in which I will lead you through a thought exercise on a traditional threat hunting operation. Let's start with defining threat hunting. The definition I like to use is the one by SANS, which is using new information on previously collected data to find signs of compromise evading detection. This definition suggests that as a threat hunter, you are constantly doing research on new and emerging threat actors or adversaries that could attempt to penetrate your environment. And by using this previously collected data, you are using it to go into your environment and actively look for trouble and discover these threat actors that are evading detection and trying to avoid being detected by your EDR platform, your SIEM, and any other protections you may have in place. So what is involved in terms of what skills you need to have to be a threat hunter? The first set of skills are defensive security skills, or those traditionally associated with being on a blue team. The next are offensive security skills, or those typically associated with being on a red team. Next is threat intelligence expertise, or skills needed in order to conduct thorough research into new and emerging threat actors that could affect your organization for doing what you do. An effective threat hunter will always be curious as to what is out there and never be satisfied with a clean incidents page. There is always trouble to be found in an environment, even if you're not getting alerts for it. So diving right into defensive security skills, the first skill I want to talk about is having network terrain knowledge. By having a better understanding of your threat landscape, you're going to make sure that you have a better understanding of what an attacker could strike at first. While asset lists are a really great resource to have, network maps are way more comprehensive because they tell you which systems interact with each other, where they're placed on the network, and which systems could be more vulnerable to attack. SentinelOne tools like Ranger can help enrich this current knowledge that you may have, and it also gives you the ability to then protect unsecured devices with a one-click deployment of the agent to those devices that maybe don't have the SentinelOne agent on them, or are currently outdated on their current software. Next is understanding your tech stack. So as a threat hunter, it's your responsibility to have an extensive knowledge of the tools that are used to defend your environment. And this is not limited to just the tools that your team has control over or uses on a daily basis. You need to know what other tools exist in your environment that maybe you don't work with on a daily basis and how they fit in to the defense of your environment. How do they interact with each other? How do they work to secure endpoints better? You also need to have effective communication with the teams that own these tools. So when something inevitably does happen, you know exactly who to contact to pull data for you or give you a better perspective on what may be going on in a particular incident. Additionally, what roles do these two tools play in the IR process? Are they specifically to detection? Do they assist with the containment and eradication of threats? Or are they mostly there for recovery and cleaning up after an incident has occurred? It's important to know where these things fit in with that particular process. Next is identifying anomalies. How do you sort out the normal from the abnormal activity on your network? And additionally, from there, how do you then classify an anomalous event once it has been detected? Because you don't want to be raising all the alarm bells for something that doesn't need to have all hands on deck, but you do need to know when an event is severe enough to call in the military forces or call in, a really, really serious IR response on a particular incident. From there, how do you understand the scope of the impact of an anomaly? So specifically, what systems have been affected by this particular event? What teams and personnel will this affect personally? And additionally, contacts for those affected systems. You need to know exactly who you need to get in touch with when a system is affected, so you can either take things off the network or respond to it as quickly as possible. Lastly, for defensive security skills is then responding to threats. Knowing the appropriate actions that you need to take to contain a threat event is vitally important when it comes to being a threat hunter. You also need to know who to communicate with in case you need to bring in more teams to help you take something off the network, or maybe, get access to a particular tool so you can do your job better. Then the ability to quickly and effectively respond, eradicate, and recover from an incident. So having a comprehensive knowledge of the NIST 6 steps, where DFIR skills come into play, or digital forensics and incident response skills. So you know exactly what to do at each step of the incident response process. Moving into offensive security skills. This is where, your red teams will really shine. But as a threat hunter, it is your responsibility to have at least a baseline knowledge of some of the things that these red teamers do on a daily basis. The first of which is an offensive security tool knowledge. So coming into this with at least preliminary knowledge of what Metasploit, Mimikatz, the Tor network, Kane-Enable, just to name a few of those tools, just knowing what they do and what they're capable of in case they are used against you in your own environment. Next is allowing hunters to see what capabilities attackers could have within their environment. So, thinking like an attacker, how do you really get into that mindset and know what capabilities they could have if they were to? Dark web research, I think, is something that's really underrated when it comes to threat hunting. By going on to the dark web and doing research and gathering knowledge from the source gives you really, really current threat intelligence directly from those that are actively trying to compromise your environment. And not only this, but having knowledge of all of these types of offensive security tools is going to make your hunts that much stronger when you go to use them. Next is thinking like an attacker. I kind of touched on this in the last slide, but think about how you would work to gain access to your network if you were the attacker. This also goes back to knowing your network landscape and knowing where the blind spots on your network exist. How would you work to compromise those blind spots? How would you exploit vulnerabilities on systems that haven't been patched in a while? And taking advantage of unsuspecting users. Are your users really well educated on security, or could they use a little bit of work in that area? So knowing where all of these vulnerabilities and blind spots exist on your network is going to give you a much better idea of where you maybe need to beef up your security and where you need to start doing some threat hunting. Additionally, studying TTPs of commonly seen threat actors. TTPs referring to tactics, techniques, and procedures. These are going to be the most effective methods of looking into your environment and trying to find threat actors that are actively trying to avoid detection within your environment. The last skill I want to touch on is threat intelligence. And this definition that you see on the screen right here is the definition of threat intelligence from Gartner. And I'm not going to read that to you because it's very long and it's very lengthy, but I do think that it gives you a really good idea of all the different things that go into threat intelligence and what is involved with gathering and then analyzing and producing finished intelligence. But I always encourage people to define threat intelligence how your organization sees best fit for them. It's going to look different for everybody, just depending on what sector you work in, how big your company is, and what the skill level of those on your security team is as well. So I do encourage you to come up with your own definition of threat intelligence as you move through this course. This may look familiar to some of you, but if you haven't seen this before, this is the threat intelligence cycle. So we start at the planning and direction phase, in which you as an organization need to set your goals and your boundaries that are informed by policy for what intelligence you would like to gather. Next, you move into the collection phase, in which you go out and you seek out information that is directly related to your organization's industry, what has affected your industry and your organization in the past, and what's going to be relevant to you moving forward to protect your environment. Once you've collected all of that raw intelligence, whether those be IOCs, TTPs, just general use cases from other companies that have experienced attacks like this, that's when you move into processing and exploitation of said intelligence. So turning that raw intelligence into something that your analysts and the teams that they work on can understand and actually use in their daily jobs. Next, we move into analysis and production. This is a continuous cycle of developing different insights as well as knowledge and understanding of what purposes intelligence can serve once you're using it to protect your environment. Once that analysis and production has been done, that is what we refer to as finished intelligence. And then we move to who need to know about this, who need to be able to use this information to better protect you, and who can help you along in this journey that is going to continue as it is a cycle. After dissemination is evaluation. So examining what you've produced and how to further improve this cycle as you're moving along into the next phase. So this is a continuous process as illustrated here, but I think a lot of organizations really get stuck on just the collection and processing phase and forget that they have to do more work afterwards in order to make intelligence worth their time. So I'm going to harp on this once again because it's something that I'm very passionate about, but the process of converting raw intelligence into finished intelligence is so important to conducting effective threat hunting. If you're missing this step and you're not taking the time to take that raw intelligence that you've worked so hard to gather and do the extra work to finish it and produce something of substance to give to your analysts so they can use this in the future, you're doing your team and your organization a disservice. So additionally, I also want to say that ingested threat intelligence should have relevance to your organization and industry. I think that a lot of organizations get caught up in the fact that they just want all of the information, but they don't really know what to do with that volume of information because not all of it is relevant to them specifically. So just some quick illustrations of what raw intelligence can look like as compared to finished intelligence. Raw intelligence is, just basic information that you can receive from a threat intel feed, from a trusted source, from open source articles, or from a paid service. So stuff like IOCs, IP addresses, URLs, file hashes, things like that. They do provide a purpose, but at the end of the day, they are raw intelligence. You haven't done any evaluation to them and determined if they are actually valuable to you yet in that current form. They can also look like CVEs, port numbers, CMD or PowerShell commands, as well as file extensions that have to do with a specific piece of malware. Whereas finished intelligence looks something like an intelligence briefing or a report that explains the impact of a mentioned threat for the organization, as well as TTPs for threat actors that are relevant to the industry or the company. So taking stuff like IOCs and CVEs that, do have something to do with your organization and industry, but then turning it into a finished report that is much easier for your analysts to digest and use is going to be so important when it comes to conducting effective threat hunting operations.